He was kicked out of a hotel for his MAGA hat, unaware. He was the owner. When the truth came out, it all backfired on the offender. Harold Wilson stepped out of a sleek black sedan parked in front of one of San Diego's most prestigious hotels. The polished hood gleamed under the sunlight, while a gentle breeze swayed the palm trees lining the driveway. Harold adjusted his signature red "Make America Great Again" cap, wearing it with the quiet confidence that matched his demeanor. It was more than a statement of political beliefs. It was a symbol of self-assurance. As Harold entered the lobby, the marble floor seemed to reflect his silhouette perfectly. The hotel staff, bustling about their duties, froze momentarily at the sight of the cap. Reactions varied. Some turned away, others gawked. But Harold had learned to ignore such things. He valued being true to himself above all. "Good evening, Mr. Wilson. Welcome to the Golden Palms Hotel," greeted the doorman, his smooth baritone voice reminiscent of a classic radio announcer. Harold nodded, handed over his car keys, and confidently walked toward the reception desk. Behind it stood Miss Laura Carter, a tall, slender woman in her mid-30s with blonde hair neatly tied into a bun. Her professional smile, polished and ready for any guest, vanished in an instant when her eyes landed on the slogan on Harold's hat. "Good evening," Harold began, removing his sunglasses and placing them in their case. "I have a reservation for the presidential suite for 3 days." Laura glanced him over, her eyes lingering on the cap, before her expression shifted to a mixture of irritation and disdain, as though she'd spotted a stain on her pristine white uniform. "I'm sorry," she said, her tone icy and polite, though barely masking her distaste. "But there seems to have been a mistake. Your room is no longer available." Harold tilted his head slightly, his demeanor still friendly. "That's odd. I booked it a month ago and received confirmation. Is there a glitch in your system?" Laura hesitated, her fingers nervously tapping on the keyboard. "No, it's not a technical issue," she admitted, avoiding eye contact. "It's about our hotel policy. We prioritize creating a comfortable environment for all our guests." "Admirable," Harold replied, raising an eyebrow. "But how does that relate to my reservation?" "You see," she stammered, her voice colder now, "your hat might provoke negative reactions from other guests." A small crowd began to form around them, as curious passers-by slowed down to eavesdrop. One even discreetly started recording the scene with their phone, pretending to read a newspaper. "Are you telling me I can't check in because of my hat?" Harold asked, his voice calm and composed. Laura pursed her lips, her composure cracking slightly. "That's correct. We suggest you find another hotel better suited to your preferences." Harold removed his cap and placed it on the counter in front of him, as though issuing a silent challenge. "You know, Miss Carter, I've stayed in hundreds of hotels, and each time I thought I'd seen it all, but it seems you're determined to surprise me." Laura stammered, at a loss for words. "I'm sorry, sir, but this is our policy," she insisted, though her voice wavered. Harold chuckled softly, as if amused by a good joke. "Your hotel must pride itself on respect for all guests. Interesting how that respect ends where my wardrobe begins." "It's not," she began, only to be interrupted by a voice from the crowd. "Hey, is this your usual level of hospitality, or is it reserved for VIPs?" A few people chuckled. The tension in the room thickened. "Apologies for the inconvenience, Mr. Wilson, but we must think of the hotel's reputation," Laura said, glancing nervously at the growing audience. "Reputation? Well said," Harold nodded. "So you're willing to breach a contract to protect your reputation." At that moment, a man with 2 young children approached the desk. He glanced at Harold, then at Laura. "Is this some kind of joke? I've been coming here every summer. Am I next to be asked to remove my baseball cap?" The murmurs grew louder. Laura stood her ground, but looked increasingly flustered. "I'm sorry, sir, but we have strict rules," she said, ignoring the man and turning back to Harold. "If you have concerns, you may contact our corporate office." The crowd in the lobby buzzed with murmurs, some supportive of Laura. "Why wear that hat to such a classy place?" a woman in an elegant dress muttered, adjusting her pearl necklace. "It's pure provocation," a man with a champagne glass chimed in. Others, however, were more skeptical. "Seriously? They're refusing a guest over a hat?" a backpack-wearing guy whispered to his companion. "Are we judging people by their clothes now?" Harold remained composed. He gestured toward his hat, now resting on the counter. "I have a contract, a confirmation, and full payment. What exactly am I missing?" Laura rolled her eyes, clearly weary of the conversation. "Contracts can be cancelled," she snapped, folding her arms. "Our reputation comes first." "So discrimination is part of your reputation?" Harold asked, raising an eyebrow with a smirk. "I believe your views disrupt the harmony of this space," Laura countered, her tone smug. "Ah, a harmony disruptor," Harold drawled, savoring her words. "I must be the most menacing guest you've ever seen." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Laura shot a glare toward the source. "Why does his hat cause trouble?" a man in the crowd asked loudly. "But the guy by the pool in a tax the rich t-shirt doesn't. Isn't that political too?" Laura's face reddened, but she ignored the remark. "I have the right to refuse service," she said sharply. "Of course," Harold agreed, "even if it violates your own rules." "I'm just doing my job," Laura insisted, though her confidence was cracking. Harold sighed, turning to the crowd with an exaggerated shrug. "Tough job, isn't it? Deciding whom to discriminate against." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Laura's face now betrayed a mix of frustration and panic. "Sir, I insist you leave the premises," she said, her voice trembling. "Very well," Harold replied calmly. "If you insist. Give me a moment to make a call." He pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and spoke briefly. "Hey, Tom. We've got a bit of a situation at the reception desk. You might want to come down and sort this out." He hung up and turned back to Laura, smiling faintly. "Help is on the way." The murmurs turned to a buzz of excitement. Some guests openly filmed the exchange now. Laura, visibly pale, tried to maintain composure. "Who was that?" she asked, barely masking her unease. "Oh, just a friend," Harold said casually. "I think he'll help you understand the real meaning of reputation." As Harold slipped his phone back into his pocket, the tension in the lobby grew palpable. The crowd, which had been murmuring moments ago, now stood silent, their eyes fixed on him, eagerly awaiting the next move. Laura Carter, who had previously been so self-assured, was visibly losing her composure. Her eyes darted between Harold and the entrance as if hoping someone would come to her rescue. Within a minute, the door swung open and a tall man in a business suit strode in. His steps were brisk and confident, his face lined with concern. Laura stiffened immediately, recognizing him and realizing he was heading straight for Harold. "Mr. Wilson, is everything all right?" the man asked without so much as glancing at Laura. "Not quite, Tom," Harold replied with his characteristic calm smile. He gestured toward Laura. "It seems Miss Carter here has decided I don't meet the standards of their so-called policy." Tom Rivers, the general manager of the hotel chain, turned to Laura with a stony expression. "Laura," he began, his tone sharp, "would you care to explain what's going on?" "Tom, she stammered, her voice trembling. "I was just following protocol. This man, he's wearing offensive attire, and I thought it best to—" Harold raised a hand, cutting her off gently. "Allow me to clarify, Tom. I've been denied check-in to the presidential suite I booked and paid for, because, according to Miss Carter, my hat disrupts the harmony of the atmosphere." The crowd gasped audibly. Someone whispered loudly, "Seriously?" Laura took a step back, but Tom wasn't about to let her off the hook. "Laura, he said firmly. "It seems you're unaware of who you're speaking to. Allow me to introduce you to Mr. Harold Wilson, the owner of this hotel. He purchased it several months ago." Laura's face drained of color. "The owner?" she croaked, her eyes widening in shock. "Yes," Tom confirmed. "And if you'd taken a moment to treat him with basic respect, you might have known that." Laura fumbled for words, her panic evident. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize." "Of course you didn't," Harold said, his voice calm but edged with sharpness. "Because instead of doing your job, you decided to use this place as a platform for your biases." The crowd murmured louder. A few guests began clapping, and someone even shouted, "What a twist!" Laura stammered, trying to defend herself. "Mr. Wilson, it was a misunderstanding. I thought I was protecting the hotel's interests." "Protecting the hotel's interests?" Harold tilted his head, feigning curiosity. "I wonder how you'll explain that to my legal team." Tom stepped closer to Laura, his tone now ice cold. "Your behavior today is unacceptable and has damaged our reputation." Harold raised a hand again, diffusing the tension. "Tom, I believe Miss Carter understands the gravity of her actions. Let's just ensure she doesn't repeat them, with me or with anyone else." Laura tried to interject, but Harold cut her off. "And by the way, I'm not in the business of firing people, though I'd strongly suggest she take an intensive course in customer service." The crowd erupted in laughter. Harold turned to address the guests. "Thank you all for your patience. This hotel will remain open to all guests, regardless of their wardrobe choices." Laura Carter stood behind the reception desk, looking as though she had just failed the most important test of her life. Words of apology began to spill from her lips, but Harold raised his hand sharply, silencing her. "Laura," he began, his smile pleasant but underlined with an icy tone. "Don't trouble yourself with excuses. I've heard enough." The crowd behind him held their breath, waiting for what would happen next. Even Tom, usually composed and unflappable, looked slightly tense. "You see," Harold continued, locking eyes with Laura, "I've always believed in freedom of speech and respect for differing opinions. It's unfortunate that my own hotel doesn't seem to uphold those values." His voice was steady, each word carrying a weight that made Laura grip the edge of the desk even tighter. "Tom," Harold said, turning to the general manager with his ever-present good-natured smile, "I think Miss Carter deserves some time to reflect. Please ensure she gets a break from her duties." Tom nodded, struggling to suppress a grin. "Of course, sir. I'll handle it right away." You can't be serious," Laura blurted, though her voice had lost all its confidence. This was just a misunderstanding." Harold raised an eyebrow. "A misunderstanding? Interesting choice of words. I hope you can explain that to our future guests when they see the video that's already making the rounds on social media." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "Best karma I've seen all year." The laughter swelled, filling the entire lobby. Laura seemed to shrink in size, her face burning with humiliation. Harold took a few steps toward the elevator, nodding to the onlookers in appreciation of their support. Applause followed him as he calmly placed his red cap back on his head. "Oh, and Laura," he said, turning back to her just as the elevator doors began to close. "Thanks for the free PR. Now I know exactly how to boost this hotel's reputation even further." The crowd burst into fresh applause. Laura opened her mouth to respond, but the elevator doors had already shut. At that moment, a young man in the crowd quipped loudly, "Time to book a suite here. Maybe the owner will personally check the service." The crowd roared with laughter, breaking the tension entirely. Inside the elevator, Harold allowed himself a small smile as he leaned against the wall, his thoughts drifting. When he reached the presidential suite, Harold walked to the window overlooking the city. His phone buzzed with a steady stream of notifications. Videos of the incident were spreading like wildfire. Captions like "Owner versus bias" and "Handling haters with style" dominated social media feeds. Pouring himself a glass of champagne from the minibar, Harold sank into a plush chair and exhaled. "A great start to my vacation," he chuckled, leaning back. On his phone, one of the videos taken by a guest was already racking up tens of thousands of views. Comments poured in, praising his composure and his stance against prejudice. Everything was going exactly as it should.